Well, good morning. I can't tell you what a great pleasure it is to be here this morning and to be able to say good morning, brothers and sisters. The Alberta Federation of Labour occupies an extraordinarily important place in the political development of this province today. And I admire your courage and your focus on the stuff that matters. So, I have an interesting presentation today. I want to explain, and you've had extraordinary number of speakers over the last couple of days, Alan Gregg, Robin Allen, Jim Stanford, and I want to add to what they have told you about what's going wrong, not just in this province, but what's going wrong in the country. And so I'm going to talk about what a petrostate is and how they go bad and why they're so dysfunctional. And it was a great revelation to me as an Albertan to discover all of the stories about these countries and the remarkable political science about places that find oil and what happens to them. All right, so you're probably wondering, here's our premier, Alison Redford, and she's just saying, my God, we have a bitumen bubble. When in fact, there really is no bitumen bubble, but the government has once again forecast its revenue stream incorrectly and is in full panic mode. Or you might be wondering, wow, I live in a province that is supposed to be the wealthiest place in Confederation, yet cannot balance its budget 5 years in a row. What the hell is all that about? Or I live in a province that has been ruled by one party for 42 years. I mean, that's kind of extraordinary. Why is that? Or you might be wondering why we sort of go on these binges where we spend like hell, and then the government goes and I think this is Alison Redford when she's wearing her blonde wig, actually, but either we're spending like hell or we're cutting back like hell. There is just this enormous volatility. So you're saying, okay, what is this all about? Why is Alberta so different? Well, this gal explained it all to me, and I found this very liberating to discover this work. So Lynn Karl, she's an American political scientist at Stanford University, and in the 1990s she wrote a remarkable book called The Paradox of Plenty. She actually went down to Venezuela. She was going to write a book about OPEC. The Venezuelans told her, no, don't worry, don't write about OPEC, write about us. Write about what oil has done to us as a people. And it was Alfonso Perez, the president of Mexico, he said, oil is the devil's excrement. It has changed our political institutions. It has weakened our economy. It has hollowed out our manufacturing base. It has, and he went on and on. He said, Lynn Karl, study what oil does to nations. So she did. Why is oil such a volatile? Why is it such a critical commodity? Why is it so different than other staples, than other stuff? Well, basically, Lynn Karl said for two reasons. I mean, oil really is like black gold. But there are two things about it. One, there is no other commodity on earth that comes with so much money attached. Piles and piles of revenue. So that's the first issue. It's the money. The second is the volatility of these revenue streams. It's up, it's down, and it's these two things together and all of the power associated with the money that makes petrostates so different. So what does it do to them? Well, the first thing that Lynn Karl discovered was that it turns them into plantation economies. Everything becomes about oil. Everything is in the service of oil. Whether you are downgrading or diminishing labor regulations, it's all to facilitate oil development and help oil companies. The next big thing that happens in petrostates is they blow up the taxation system. They run on petrodollars. If you're not being taxed, though, you're not being represented. Then goes statecraft. All right, you're sitting on a pile of revenue. You've got on hydrocarbons. You somehow think that these hydrocarbons are going to make you extraordinarily intelligent than other people, and you abandon statecraft and you start behaving like the Keystone Cops. Transparency goes out the door in Petro states. Nobody wants to talk about the money, where the money is going, how the money is being spent, how much is being saved. You have the regulatory capture of one, or the capture of one institution after another by oil interests, particularly regulators. And then the people in general become fat and lazy. So let me explain some of this. So in sum, here's Terry Lynn Karl saying, what is the legacy? Over-centralized power. You're replacing taxes and statecraft with petrodollars. And ultimately, the state is put at the service of the oil industry, and nothing else matters. There's a continuum here, all right? So you've got petrostates on the left, you've got petrostates on the right, you have petrostates that can be democratic, and you have petrostates that can be extremely autocratic. Terry Lynn Karl, Michael Ross, a number of other political scientists have all observed that if you start out finding oil as a democracy, it will, over time, erode your democratic institutions. And if you start out as an autocratic regime, oil will strengthen that dictatorship. So we have, the smiling Sarah Palin from Alaska as a petro-politician. We have the strong arm of Vladimir Putin in Russia. It's probably the world's #1 petrostate in terms of production. And you also have, the late Hugo Chavez. And all of these people, though, have had to struggle with the corrosive influence of petrodollars. So here's the first factor. As soon as your government gets hooked on oil and gas revenues above 20%, you're a petrostate. Louisiana, it's a petrostate. 30 to 40% of its revenue comes from oil and gas. Alaska, 90%. Nigeria, 77%. I love that. The president of Nigeria, his name is Goodluck Johnson. And Nigeria, by the way, can't balance its books either. I think every petropolitician should come with the term good luck. Alberta, 18 to 30%. Right now, it's 30% of our revenue is coming from petrodollars. So here's the danger. Petrostates rely on an unsustainable development trajectory fueled by an inexhaustible resource, and bing, bangity, boom, this resource forms an implacable barrier to change. And when I first read that, I said, my God, there's Alberta in a paragraph. Right, the taxation effect. What is our big boast in this province? Our boast is, not that we are a just and fair place or a pleasant place to live. What we say about Alberta, first word that comes out of every politician's mouth is that you're not being taxed. Hallelujah. We've got the no sales tax, low corporate tax. Isn't it a bargain to live in Alberta? Well, if you're not being taxed, you're not going to be represented either. And then you can have the oil and gas industry goes around boasting this. Hey guys, you can't criticize us. You can't question us because we're building your roads. We're constructing your hospitals. We're paying for your schools, right? And what's the other issue here? Well, the other issue here is that, here's another example of how debased our tax system is. Ontario, you've got a sales tax. BC, Saskatchewan, Alberta, no, we don't want to go there. We don't want any representation in our taxation system. And as a consequence of living off oil revenues, we're that big black volatile line in terms of revenue. And so we're going up and down all the time. And the other provinces, they're on a much more stable revenue stream coming from taxpayers. Here's Deloitte, big corporate firm saying, what do they say about this? Well, when you're not being taxed, that weakens the fiscal social contract between citizens and state leaders, as the normally tax-paying public exerts less scrutiny of how tax revenues are raised and spent. That's also true in Alberta. And if you're not being taxed and you're not being represented, why vote? 42% of us go to the polls. That means that 60% of us are sitting on our asses at home, not engaged. Shame indeed. So when taxation is absent, populations tend to be politically inactive, relatively obedient, and surprisingly loyal. When I read that line, I also thought again of Alberta. And when somebody starts raising some questions about this, as Lauren Gibson did, our chief electoral officer, was raising some rather important questions about political fraud and other issues. Back in, I believe it was in 2008, what was the government's response? They fired his ass. Gone. We don't want to discuss those issues. And how does this make us then look like other Petro states? Well, here's the continuum. In the Middle East, why is the Middle East so different? Direct taxes account for 6% of government revenues. Petromania, all right? So taxation, then you've got the spending effect. And how does government spend these flows of petrodollars? Well, they usually spend it to and use the money to concentrate and centralize power. So here you can see an example of how the Alberta government tends to get into this position of always overspending when the money is flowing and then contracting. And then we get into the bad habit of spending a lot of money in bad places. So, we buggered up our entire electricity system. That was Ralph Klein's deregulation program. And remember, he all sent us Ralph bucks so that we wouldn't think too much about it. And then, so this is what we need is probably a $4 billion, $5 billion transmission upgrade. Well, we've got a contract out for $16 billion that we will pay for as taxpayers. We're building the transmission lines, by the way, for pipeline companies. And who gets the contract? Company under investigation for bribery scandals around the world. We have a new Alberta energy regulator called, we've just blown up the ERCB. By the way, whenever Alberta has a problem, or whenever a petro state has a problem, you make everything bigger, more concentrated. Who do we put in to lead our new Alberta energy regulator? Gerald Proddy. Who is Gerald Proddy? Well, Gerald Proddy is an oil and gas lobbyist, the founder of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, and a senior VP for Encana for 10 years, one of the most powerful companies in this province. What about our health care? We blew that up. Oh, we'll get bigger. And when we get bigger, everything will work much better. Again, the loss of accountability is extraordinary. And of course, by getting bigger, we just end up spending more money. And not in the right places, not on people, not on proper care for communities, but on salaries for administrators and other special interests. We've wasted nearly $2 billion in carbon capture and storage. And where does this money go? It goes to the oil industry so that we can create a publicly funded garbage disposal service for them and not solve any problems either. Oil makes people believe that the desert can turn green, that socialism can be reborn, that wealth can be generated without work, and there are no limits to where one can go. In Kuwait, what do they do with their oil money? Build an indoor ski rink. How much oil does this require to keep this place cold, where it's 40 degrees outside? 6,000 barrels of oil a day. Political longevity. When you've got the money, you can stay in power a long time when you're sitting on a pile of hydrocarbons. Texas. The Democrats ruled Texas for 90 years on the basis of its oil wealth. The Republicans have now ruled for 30 years on the basis of that state's declining oil wealth. The PRI ruled Mexico for 70 years on the basis of Mexico's declining oil wealth. The Tories, on the basis of oil wealth and gas wealth, have ruled this province for 42 years. King Ralph was around for 14 years, well, actually more than 12 years, an extraordinary reign. Where else in the country do you refer to your premier as a king? Margaret Thatcher ruled England 12 years on the basis of oil wealth from the North Sea. She funded her political revolution with oil money. She is the model for Stephen Harper. Now, did Margaret Thatcher save a dime? Did she save a dime of the oil wealth in the North Sea? No. She spent it to fight a war against Argentina. She spent it to fight a war against the unions of her country. On it goes, but not a dime was saved. Hugo Chavez, long period of reign in Venezuela, and I would say, despite his very best efforts, oil in the end defeated him. High levels of dependence on oil rents have always tended to reinforce the regime in power, period. But there's a caveat here. So when is the best time for change in a petro state? When the price of oil falls. When did we see unrest throughout North Africa and the Middle East? In 2008, when oil fell from $140 to $30, and then the Arab Spring was unleashed. So the political opportunity for change in every petro state comes when the price of oil falls and everyone recognizes how corrupt the whole thing is. Last thing, let's talk a bit about the money and the Norwegian exception. Premier Peter Lougheed put us on a Scandinavian path. He wanted to save the money for future generations. The first thing he did when he became premier was to raise royalties and to stick 30% of them in a savings fund. So at that time, we were capturing 40% of the profits from oil and gas production in this province when oil and gas were, oil was worth less than $20 a barrel. Ever since then, we have not met that target, and we have been giving the resource away. We have lowered our royalties, and we have not saved. Here's the great model that Murray Smith says works for us. Give it away. What businessman goes to another country and says, we've got a great deal for you, we give it away? The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, what do they say? The Norwegians don't give it away, and yet everyone still wants to play in the North Sea. Companies there get 22% of net revenues. Why does everyone want to play in Alberta, in the Great Magic Sandbox in northern Alberta? Because we do give it away. They get to take home 53% of their net revenues and take it back to Houston, or take it back to China, or take it back to Norway. The Government Accountability Office in the United States, here's just a good measure of the giveaway. They did this comparison of oil rents in the United States. Wyoming, California, and Louisiana earn more than we do. So Lougheed set 40% for collection. Klein's targets were 20 to 25%. Now we're actually below 10%. We are leaving tens of billions of dollars on the table every year. When Fred Dunn, our former auditor, tried to point this out, said, look, you've got targets here, you're not meeting them, why are you leaving tens of billions of dollars on the table for multinational corporations? And here was the response of the government. To criticize government decisions and even promote alternative policies is contrary to the principles of Alberta's democracy. Norway had a conversation about its oil wealth. They said, we will take the money off the table. If we don't, it will destroy us as a democracy, and we will save for future generations. 90% of their money goes into a pension fund. It is now worth approximately $650 billion. When the oil runs out in Norway, and it will soon, they will have something to run on, and we will not. Why was Norway different? Partly because of this guy, Farouk al-Qasim, Iraqi petroleum geologist. Marries a Norwegian girl. They have a child with cerebral palsy. They go back to Norway, just as Norway discovers oil in the North Sea. And the Norwegians are fairly clever people that recognize we know about trees, we know about fish, hydroelectricity. Damn, we don't know a damn thing about oil. They hire Farouk al-Qasim. And Farouk tells them, basically, he said, boils it down to two things. They said, what should we do? He said, go slow, save the money. And that's why the Norwegian experience has been different. That's what we've got saved for the future. That won't even pay for the cost of reclaiming the tailings ponds in Fort McMurray. All right, then the last thing here. All right, so what governments sitting on hydrocarbons lose their ability to govern wisely. If you want to find smart governments, they are governments that are dealing with austerity, with scarcity. That's where you find innovation, not in governments that are sitting on hydrocarbons. So we've overdeveloped this resource. We've approved more than 100 projects, and now we're scrambling to get 3 different pipelines built so that we can find a coastal port for the resource. Okay? We've not been very strategic about this. We've ignored evidence from the United States since 2008 that says, look, American gasoline consumption has been going down since 2008 for a variety of reasons. The recession, unemployment, people are driving less, owning fewer cars, and as the oil and gas industry explained to me the other day, well, and they're texting more. So they're traveling less, right? The United States oil requirements are going down. I mean, they're producing 2 million more barrels than they were, and oil consumption has gone down by 2 million barrels. So 4 million barrels that we thought that we could provide is gone. And we have not planned for this. And we have not thought carefully about the future. Here's a Venezuelan explaining the problems in Venezuela. This is the problem in Alberta. And what is our solution to all of these problems? The lack of strategic thinking, our inability to go slow, our giving away of the resources. The solution to every problem becomes, in a petrostate, this. It is a lot easier and faster to build a pipeline than in an efficient and representative state. So that is where I shall end. But one more comment. All right, so what do you do? All right, once you know this is the kind of place you live in, what do we do as citizens? I think Peter Lougheed said it best. He laid out practically a platform in 2004, 2005. And he said, number 1, behave like an owner. Save for a rainy day. Collect your fair share. Add value to the resource. Right now, our plans for bitumen, we want to do to bitumen what we've done to Alberta beef. We export it to the United States. It becomes backfiller for slaughterhouses in the United States, so the U.S. can then export that beef. 10% of their beef exports are largely our beef going to slaughterhouses and leaving the States. Now we want to send our bitumen to coastal refineries so that the United States can export refined petroleum goods around the world. Shame indeed. So add value. Last but not least, go slow and clean up the mess. Thank you.